Thank you, Mercer. Thank you for everyone for attending. This session is value-packed, so let's get started right away. So I'm very excited about today's presentation because it is a subject that I'm passionate about. I've been helping businesses get value from their data for some time now, and I've observed a clear patterns of what makes a data initiative successful and generate value, and what can make it a total waste of time and money. So we will cover everything from what's a data strategy and why you need one, to its implementation and everything in between. And I also, even for people attending this presentation, I have a workbook, and I'll give a link at the end of the presentation. And this is pretty much a sheet where you will be able to apply what we learned today in this presentation. All right, so before I do any of that, before we go to the main subject, I just want to share a small story with you. And this is from my experience as a data consultant. The only thing I changed from that story is the name of the person and the company they work for. All right, so meet Michael Reynolds. Michael is a marketing director at Luxaloom. He was recently hired to develop a marketing strategies, increase sales, and brand awareness for the company. He manages a $1.5 million annual marketing budget spread across 5 paid ad platforms. And Michael reached out to me 2 years ago to handle their data analytic needs. And during the discovery call with him, I asked him what led him to need our services and what did he tried before. So this is the little story I have for you, is basically his timeline of what he did before hiring me. And when you're going to take a look at this timeline, I just want to remind you that Michael also has a marketing team to manage. Sales continue. He needs to continue generating sales. He can't dedicate all of his time to resolving tracking issues. So the timeline here might look ridiculous, but I've seen even worse. So this is nothing special. This is what happens in the real world. All right, so in his first week, Michael realized that his GA4 and GTM knowledge is outdated, and updating it would be too complicated, too long, actually. And so he decides to hire someone to fix GA4, even though the instruction he provided to that freelancer were not extremely clear. By week 3, GA4 is supposed to be fixed, and Michael noticed that UTM parameters across paid ad platforms are inconsistent or incomplete, which make analysis complicated. So again, he goes back to the drawing board, build a UTM naming convention, dispatch that to the marketing team to implement across all paid ad platform. And we're already at week 10 at that point. Then another issue pops up. He realized that meta ads conversions aren't tracked properly, and that is also fixed by week 13. So then Michael goes back to J4, tries to build a report in J4, and can't get what he needs. So he decides to hire another freelancer to build reports. And when that is done, he realized that 25% of the website traffic is unassigned. So again, hires a more expensive freelancer to fix GA4 again. We're already at week 18. So time goes by, and he decides to wait a little bit more for accurate data to come in because he doesn't have anything to work with. So while the data is coming in, he's doing his thing, and by week 26, he goes back to GA4 in panic, trying to build some report and find some opportunities in the data. And when he goes back, realize that UTMs are still not correctly implemented on new campaigns, and the tracking stopped working 2 weeks ago because of some change made to the website, and nobody told him about it. So that's the timeline Michael was went through before contacting me. So he's 6 months in, the data is still unreliable for analysis, and it feels like achieving accurate data will be an ongoing uphill battle. So does that sound familiar to anyone? I've seen this happen many times, and it's not because Michael doesn't know what he's doing or he's incompetent. He just greatly underestimated how difficult it is to have and maintain accurate data in a fast-changing environment. But what exactly did he do wrong? So there was no data test, alerts, or even scheduled manual verification. So no way to know if the data is good and continues to be good. He discovered issues as they came. Instead of having a plan, listing out all of the problems, fixing them in a bunch, he had to wait every time, wasting a lot of time in the process. And there was no standardized procedures, whether it was to build a UTM structure, how to deploy the UTM structure, how to make change to the website, and who to inform. There's just no procedures in place. So ultimately, he just didn't have a clear strategy. He was simply doing stuff with no clear goals or framework. So as good old Benjamin Franklin said, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. And if we want to be more relevant to today's presentation, every successful data initiative starts with a good plan, a data strategy. All right, so that was my little story to prime the subject, but what exactly is a data strategy? Well, data strategy, it's basically just a plan of how an organization will use data to achieve its business goals, right? It's as simple as that. And I must add that there's no one size fit all when it comes to data strategy. A company with 1,000 employees operating across many jurisdictions will need a much more detailed and robust data strategy compared to an e-commerce business making $5 million a year. And that's why I also have the workbook that I'm going to present at the end of the presentation. This should help you out figure out the right level of detail you should go into your data strategy when you build it. All right, so why do you need a data strategy? Well, real life data is messy and hard to manage. If no processes are in place, you won't be able to maintain an acceptable level of data quality. And if there's no data quality, there's just no value to get from your data. So that should be priority number one. Your competitor might have one, leaving you at a serious disadvantage. And ultimately, if you don't have a data strategy, your data initiative will fail at generating value and die, or even worse, continue to bleed money. All right, so hopefully by now you understand what is a data strategy and why it's important. So we can finally move on to the how-to portion of this presentation and how to build a data strategy. So let's get started. We are going to the tactical part of this presentation, and the first step is to get the stakeholders involved, right? Without them, there's no data initiative. So we'll look at why it's important to engage them and how. So the first reason why you want to involve the stakeholders, and this could be a whole presentation by itself, so I'll try to keep it short. It's because they are responsible to implement a data-driven culture. Without that, your data initiative has no chance of success. There's a lot of companies out there, and what I mean by data-driven culture, it makes most of its strategic decisions based on data analysis. All right, and it has to start from the top. So a lot of companies will say that they are data-driven, but it's rarely clear about what exactly we mean by data-driven. So let me show you an example. It means not, first saying you're data-driven means nothing if you don't walk the talk. So here's what it looks like in the real world. Well, first they will build and implement a data strategy. They are very serious about performance metric, their KPIs. They prioritize data quality. Again, they understand that if there's no data quality, there's no value to get from your data. We'll see later on in this presentation how to do that. They incorporate data in most of their decision, obviously, and the data team is involved in board meetings, which means that the data leader knows about the business challenge and goals. He's not simply crunching out reports without really having any context. And finally, data analytics is considered before any project, which means that if you're about to make change to the website to figure out if it influenced the conversion rate, well, you should think about how you're going to measure that before pushing those change live to the website, for example. So just a very important detail about that. Shifting to a data-driven culture is hard, and it starts from the top. So if C-level executives don't commit to a data-driven culture with actions, then just don't even bother with a data initiative. You'll just waste money and time. It's sad, but it is the reason why we hear so much about data, but not so much about successful story. It is because it is hard and it's a whole shift. But if you're ready to do that and put in the work, well, this presentation will be your stepping stone into getting value from data. The second reason why you should engage stakeholders is just to have diverse perspective. They will bring their industry knowledge, they know their strengths and weaknesses of their department, and they probably have a bunch of questions they'd like to be able to answer using data. So you should include every stakeholders and not just the person asking you to kind of lead the data initiative. And lastly, and the reason is simply for resource, right? They will unlock the budget, the personnel, the technology, and you'll need that to build a successful data initiative. So that's another reason why you should engage the stakeholders. Now, who leads the data strategy engagement? This will depend from organization to organization, but it needs to be someone who has some experience implementing data initiatives, can talk business and tech, and also has the support of C-level executives, because they will need it if you want things to move. All right. So this was the why you should engage the stakeholders. Let's just look at how to do it. And again, in the workbook, you'll have a place where you can list them out and do everything I talk about in this presentation. So the first thing you want to do is identify them and list them. So C-level executive, business unit leader like IT, director, marketing, operations. They will benefit from the data, so you should at least have one meeting with them. So again, do not only involve the CEO or the person asking for it. Have a meeting with every business unit leader. You will find opportunities to help them do their job with little additional effort. The second thing you want to do when engaging the stakeholders is just tailoring your message. If you talk to the CMO, well, talk about how accurate tracking will increase their return on ad spend by helping the algorithm for paid ad platforms and improve their targeting. That's just 101 if you're trying to sell a project. Just demonstrate value, talk their language, show them this presentation if you need to. Just get them excited about the project, because it is a long road and a difficult road ahead. You need them to be motivated. All right, so that's why digital marketing is a good place to start, because normally the data will have a direct impact on the results of your marketing, which will provide quick wins and give your data initiative some momentum. And lastly, when you're getting the stakeholders involved, is to define and agree on responsibilities. So the KPIs they are responsible for, the meetings they will need to attend, and the deliverables from both sides. Agree on that, and you'll have the stakeholders trust you and believe that you can actually generate value from a project like that. Normally those projects can be costly, so showing some initiative and being well organized will go a long way. All right, so that was about step number one in your data strategy. It's was to involve the stakeholders. So implement a data-driven culture, find who needs to be involved and get them excited, define and agree on responsibilities. So the second step, now we are going in the technical part, is the discovery part. Now that we have the stakeholders on board, it's time to meet with them, whether in a meeting, one-on-one meeting, group meeting, or maybe have them fill out the workbook. And the first thing you'll want to do is define the organization's goals, right? So again, in the workbook, you can define the goals. For example, reach a return on ad spend of 3 by the end of 2024. And that's the goal of the marketing department. That's just an example. Secondly, what you'll want to do is list out all of your business questions you'd like to be able to answer using data, whether it's not possible right now or you'd like to have it to be able to answer that question more easily, right? So just list all of your questions. Once you have all of your questions, the next step you want to do is to define what is not working with the current way of answering each business question, whether it's not possible or there's just something that don't work. So to give you an example, if we take the question, what is our return on ad spend per acquisition channel? Maybe the current state of that question right now is it is a manual and time-consuming process. We simply take the revenue and divide it by our ad spend, so it's more of a guess than actual return on ad spend. It's only available to the marketing director because he's the only person with access to those 5 paid ad platforms. So there's a bunch of issues with the way the data is. For example, all of the data was, but also what's good about the data we can list. So the data is accurate and complete starting on January 15, 2024, right? So that's the current state of the data for answering that question. So the second step to that is simply to do the inverse, which is what would be the desired state for that question. If we listed that question, is because we'd like to improve on how we answer that question. So for example, it has to update daily automatically, available to the whole marketing team, it's accurate, and basically just define what would be your desired state for that question. So now that it's done, we listed the current state, which probably made it in simple term what's wrong right now, but now we need to define the exact problem. Why is it like that? What's the current state of the data? So for example, ad group were not included in UTMs prior to January 15, and there was a bunch of very specific issue that made this question really difficult to answer. So you list those problems out. Again, you can do that in the workbook. And finally, you should just list out the chosen solutions from the company. So in this case, for example, the data was wrong, but then we fixed everything on January 15. And our solution is simply to ignore the data prior to that date and implement some data tests and alerts to make sure that moving forward, the data will be good. That's a viable solution. If that works for your company, then why not? We don't need to fix everything. Moving forward, the data is good. So we give it a score of good moving forward. When you do that exercise, your data will typically fall within 4 categories. It's going to be good. So historical and new data is good. Good moving forward, just like in our example. Could be good would be that the new data is good, but we need to fix the historical data. For example, if the requirements were to get a year-over-year comparison, then we need to fix the historical data to get that. There's no way to get that, or wait another year, right? Or the data is just bad. The new data coming in is bad and the old data is bad. Then we can decide when we plan our project if we want to fix it or what's the solution we decide on that. That's up to you. All right, so that's it for discovery. So we've looked so far in this presentation on how to engage the stakeholders and what is the discovery process, which is just to define the current and desired state, identify the problems preventing you from achieving that desired state, and agreeing on the solutions and what should be the next steps. So I hope this makes sense where we're going with this, right? Stakeholders, gathering requirements from stakeholders, which brings us to the second requirement gathering phase, which is data governance. All right, so we hear that word all the time, but what does that mean? Data governance is just the set of rules and practice or a document on how data is managed and used throughout its life cycle. All right. And don't go crazy with data governance. Data governance is an ongoing process, and you should just do the minimum that needs to be done for you to be efficient with data, because again, it's really easy to over-engineer, so the balance is key. The workbook will give you a lot of example on that and to figure out what's right for you, but let me show you a couple of, at least the basics of what should be in data governance. So the first thing you'll want to do is a business glossary, right? You just want to define your business term. What do we mean with gross revenue, for example? In this case here, if you look at the definition, it mentions that it is based on the ship date. So that's good to know, because someone could run an analysis on gross revenue and use the order creation date instead of the ship date. This ensures that everyone that runs an analysis related to gross revenue will use the ship date as their date dimension, right? So this makes a good difference, because now two persons running the same analysis should get the same results, which was not the case if this was not defined anywhere. And we also include the formula just to make it clear how we calculate that specific KPI. All right. Next thing is just to have a simple data platform architecture diagram. So just to show how your data flows through the organization systems and platform, right? We'll get back to that once we actually choose the technologies. Data roles here. Again, let's keep it simple. If you have manually defined, like manual input in your company, like UTMs, maybe SKU cost, coupon code type, those manual fields are the ones that tend to cause some problem. So make it clear who's responsible to write them down or to validate that they're accurate, or just like to maintain that. If it's documented, at least you won't have just a bunch of people saying it should be someone else when the pipeline fails. In your data governance, the basics, data quality, again, it's incredibly important. So you should set rules and process to ensure that the data is and will remain accurate. So questions like, what should be the tests that we do on the data to make sure it's valid? What do we need some alerts, and what should be the trigger? Questions like that. Again, documenting that will make sure that it happens. If you're a bigger organization or subject to specific law, this really applies to you. So one thing you want to do is just make sure that which law you're subject to. Are you compliant? Are you storing any personal information? Do you need it? Is it safe? Is it ethical? Stuff, questions like that. Again, if you don't think about those, it might actually cost you a lot down the line if you get hit by I don't know, like by GDPR or CCPA or stuff like that. And finally, training and enablement. That's another thing. It won't happen just if you don't plan for it. If you try to foster a data-driven culture, training and enablement needs to be planned. So what I mean by that is providing resource to your employees on how to use the technologies, the business glossary, how to understand their own KPIs and what it affects in the business, and the legal and ethical considerations when handling data, right? So that's your basic for data governance. And again, in the workbook, you'll be able to fill out the details in a well-structured manner. So just to recap, we've looked at the stakeholders, how to involve the stakeholders and why, the discovery, which is gathering the requirements, and now data governance. So the result of that is a comprehensive list of all the requirements our data platform technology. So now we will choose the technologies. We had to do this before to have the requirements to know exactly which technology we should choose, because that technology needs to meet our requirement. It needs to be able to do what we need, basically. So this is step number 4. So what do I mean by a data platform? It's just a centralized system that organizes the data by collecting, storing, processing, and making it accessible for various applications and analysis. So basically from start to finish, the systems that takes care of your data is what we call the data platform. That platform needs to be scalable and reliable, performant and efficient, secure and well documented. So nowadays, I would say like if you go cloud, like with Google Cloud Platform, AWS, they will meet pretty much all of those requirements. But if you go with more obscure platform, make sure that they fit those criteria. So as you can see right now, this is a more detailed view of like what a data platform could look like. There's a lot of option out there. Those are all of like, well, some of the providers out there. There's a lot of option. So I've prepared a small guide to help you narrow it down to just a few options. So let me show you how I would go about it. The first thing you want to do is just prioritize the technologies that integrate well with your organization's IT ecosystem. Again, if you're on the Google ecosystem, like Google Sheets, Google Drive, Gmail, it makes sense to go with Google Cloud Platform, maybe Google BigQuery, Looker Studio, and stay in that ecosystem. Same thing if you're on Microsoft, it might make more sense to go with Azure, for example. All right. Then you have your list of requirements. Just make sure that the technologies you choose meet your requirement. I know this sounds like very basic, but I see this so many times. People hear about this platform supposed to be the best. They go and choose that and invest a ton of money into that, only to realize a couple months down the line that it doesn't do what they want it to do. And they already knew they needed that, but they just didn't spend the time to go and look at the list of features before choosing a technology. So spend the time to do that. Go check what they offer and even test it out if you can. The other thing you want to do is prioritize technology your team is familiar with. Again, sounds basic, but I see the opposite happening all the time. If your team is familiar with Looker Studio, for example, it doesn't make too much sense to go with Tableau just because you've heard that that's what the big boys are using. That's not a good argument. If your team is familiar with Looker Studio, they will be faster, they will use it more, and you'll have to spend less money if you do that. And finally, pricing. Right? You just want to make sure that you take a good look at the pricing structure of those platforms, because sometimes they make it complicated. So just make sure you're clear on what it's going to cost and cost at scale as well. All right, so just to give you a small example, when you choose your platform, this is the tech stack I work with most of our clients. So it's on the Google ecosystem. I'm a Fivetran and dbt partner, so it makes sense for me to use that. And since I do most of the data transformation on the backend, I'm quite flexible when it comes to which dashboard platform to use. So if you had no real preference when it comes to data technology, this is a good tech stack to at least look at and make sure it fit your requirements. I'll say one very specific tip regarding choosing your data platform. As a general rule, wherever possible, your data transformations should not live in your data visualization tool. So a lot of like Looker Studio, Tableau, they will provide you with features to build calculated fields, blend some data. It's okay to do it for like very small and simple metrics, but most of the data transformation should happen on the back end. It will make documenting, troubleshooting, monitoring the data quality, security, so much better. Just don't do it. Just make most of your transformation outside of your dashboarding tool, and just make your dashboarding tool just show the charts, and you'll save a lot of trouble. And now we mentioned in the data governance about the diagram. Now that you've selected the technologies, you can fill out your data platform architecture diagram. It doesn't have to be much more complicated than the one I'm showing right now. It's just a way to show to anyone how the data is flowing for your organization, right? So again, a small recap. We looked at why and how engage the stakeholder, discovery and data governance, which was our list of requirements. And with those requirements, we were able to choose the data platform technologies that meet our needs. So now let's move to the last step of this presentation, which is the prioritization and this sprint planning of your first project to implement your data strategy to make it real. Let's go back to our question. What is our return on ad spend per acquisition channel? This is now, imagine we go back to the list of questions and we're trying to just prioritize which question should be answered first, right? How do we determine that? Because there's a cost to answering any question, so we need to prioritize in some way. So the first thing we're going to do is consider the business impact of answering that question. What you can do, and you can do that in the workbook, is just set a score to each question. So does answering that as a high, low, medium impact? You can do that right away, or if you need more help, there's also in the workbook a bunch of sub questions to ask yourself to figure out what should be the impact score, right? So is the question benefit more than one department? Is it currently impossible to answer? If we answer that question, can we do something about it? And if so, what are we going to do about it? If there's no action tied to that question, it might not be a high business impact question, and maybe you should prioritize something else, right? So again, that's all available in the workbook, but that's the idea here. So you do that for every question that you listed. So now we have all of the question with a score of high to low on the business impact. Then we need to combine that with the effort required to answer some questions, right? Because a question might be high impact, but it can be extremely costly to answer and might not be worth it once we consider the effort required. All right, so again, it's just a scoring system to help you prioritize. So for each question, you're gonna go in there and just give it a score on the effort required to answer that question. This is a technical process. You'll probably need a senior data engineer or the data leader to look at that to assess if it's complicated or not, because he's gonna have to consider the many things to give it a score. But at least you know that those two components are required to prioritize. How big of an impact it has, how difficult it is. So you go and give a score to each question. Again, we have sub-question prepared to help you figure this out. If the question requires multiple data from multiple sources, then it makes it more complicated. If it's high volume of data enough for it to have like technical considerations because of the amount, then it makes it more difficult. Do we need to track changes over time? That's a big one. If you need to track and not just the current state, then it makes it considerably more difficult. So based on that, you're gonna end up with a table that looks something like this for each question. Each question, you have them listed, and they're gonna have a data quality score, which we did earlier during the discovery. They're gonna have a business impact score and an implementation effort score, right? And based on that, you just prioritize the question. Your goal here is to figure out the quick wins, right? You want questions that have a high business impact and that are low effort to implement. So question that lives in there, those are the one you want to answer as your first project. It's going to build momentum. It's going to help reinforce this data-driven culture. Start there. So now that your questions are prioritized, you just have to plan the implementation. So now this depends on your company, how projects are planned. So I'll just go over this quickly, how we approach this when building data pipeline. So we divide the project into smaller sprints, and each sprint should have an overall goal and clear deliverables for each task, and a definition of what it means for each task to be done. We also try to have each sprints provide standalone value, right? So if you only do one sprint, it shouldn't require a second sprint before it generates value. So we try to have each of these little projects provide value when possible. We also need a sprint in your plan. It should also include the required resource. So technologies, employees, access that are going to be needed to make this project successful and delivered on time. We'll need a timeline, start and end date, and the important milestones, roles and responsibilities, contingency plan, what are the risks, the known unknowns, and the cost, right? So that's how we tend to plan sprints. And with all of that, I mean, you should, if you filled out the data strategy workbook, your first sprint should be value packed, and you're well on your way to get value from your data. So that's it for sprints. That's what we try to do when we plan for the first and subsequent project of a data initiative. And with that, you're well on your way to get value very quickly from your data, and planning will end up saving you a ton of time, money, and frustration. One caveat I want to say with sprint planning is to resist the temptation to overload sprint with too many tasks or objectives, because the first thing that's going to, or that people will cut corners around or won't do correctly, will be documentation, will be data quality tests and alerts. And again, if data quality becomes low over time because you skip those steps all the time, then your data initiative won't generate value, because with the inaccurate data, you won't be getting any value. So resist the temptation of making every sprint too packed. You're already saving a bunch of time by planning it that way. So don't get greedy. And that's it. That's how you build a data strategy. There's basically those 5 steps, and with the data strategy workbook, you'll have pretty much everything you need.